I'm not really, I'm not doing any building.
Okay, let's get started because we only have a few minutes today. We'll start a new simon today. The last thing that we saw is the permissibility of a teacher confiscating an item that is distracting to both the student and to the other students. And the conclusion of Rav Shirag is that it is completely permitted to confiscate the item. However, the teacher becomes a shomer on the item, presumably a shomer chinam, but has to make sure that it's properly locked away, because if he leaves it in a place where other students can easily access it and it could get stolen, so then he'll be chayiv for pshia. And furthermore, he has to return it to the student after a reasonable time where the student will be duly chastened to know not to have such items in the classroom. Let's go on to a very next shua, very short. Shimush bebul shel hadoar pam shenit, using a postage stamp a second time. Now, this is a bit anachronistic because I don't remember the last time I put a stamp on an envelope. I think I still have some stamps in my drawer in my office, my home office, but it's just been so many years. But I guess they still use stamps. You use stamps, right? Okay, kibalti michtav bedoar ula'achar hitbonenut ra'iti she'ein al habul chotemet. I got a letter in the mail, and after looking carefully at the envelope, I realized the stamp has not been the stamp does not have a seal on it. It hasn't been, that's right, it hasn't been postmarked. May I use the stamp a second time, or must I tear it up and destroy it? So what's the argument? You say no, you shouldn't use the stamp.
Obviously, it was used.
Yeah, it's time to put it in the stamp collection, forget about it.
So the post office mistakenly didn't stamp.
Well, if the post office made a mistake, maybe I can enterprise on that mistake. In other words, no? What do you say? No?
The store that close behind the phone, torn up stick. In his office or something like that. And they thought that he was, because they had a picture of Sarah, they thought he was being against the
Tsar, yeah.
He explained that it had been used before.
It had been used before. Okay.
Said that the thing about made by hand. They wanted to know the person as the postage, so it was this an unused stuff. Slightly different.
Okay. Anyway, hadavar yadua she'adam mishalem ledor avur hasherut shehu mekabel. It is well known that a person pays the post office for service in exchange for service. V'zeh na'asa al yedei tashlum habul, and you pay for that service through the purchase of a stamp. V'lachein kevin shahador asa et melachto ne'emana. So since the post office did its job faithfully, v'he'avir et hamichtav lemakom haya'ad shelo, magia lahem tashlum habul. And because the post office performed their duty properly, they delivered the letter, they're entitled to payment for that stamp. Umasha habu lo chatum. The fact that the stamp is not postmarked, zet ta'ud shel hapakid o shel hamechona shemachtimat habulim. That's either the mistake of the postmaster or the machine that is in charge of post-dating the stamps. V'im yirtze lishloach od mechtav, aleim l'shalem al hasherut hanasaf sheyesh bazeh. And therefore, if you want to be able to send a letter with this same stamp, you have to pay the post office for it. In other words, the stamp is only a representation of payment for service. The way he's sort of depicting it is that the stamp is something that you get after you pay the post office to do their job. So it's the stamp is a sign that you've paid. So you can't use that a second time. And therefore you have to tear up the stamp. You cannot use it for another letter.
It's possible that the other person paid at the other end, right? But it wasn't mistakenly, or the machine didn't work to put the seal on it, so maybe it's a setback of whether it was paid. But they.
Why would there be a suffix whether it was paid? I would say there would be a suffix
Sure.
neighbor. I mean, how else could he have gotten the stamp?
Oh, how did it stand?
I mean, he got the stamp because he paid for it. The only thing that I could say might be a suffix is sometimes you'll get an invitation in the mail, and maybe the person put on a stamp thinking he was going to mail it, and then he decided afterwards he would just hand deliver it because it would go faster than putting it in the mail. In that situation, I could easily hear you being able to use the stamp because the post office did not provide any service for that stamp. So in that situation, you can certainly reuse the stamp. Okay, but the Makor Baruch says, Lichora din ze pasha ta'azu ligzolet hador. He says, at face value, this should be fairly obvious that you can't steal from the post office. Va'amar lanu Rabbeinu Hagon HaMachaber Shlita sheken hora Hagon Rav Beis Tzedek Abba Shol Zatzal. So, and the Rav Sharaga said that this was how Rav Abba Shaul, who was the Rav Beis Tzedek, I don't remember the last, is it Abba Shaul Uziel? I'm not sure if that's who he's referring to, but that's how he paskined as well. Amnon, Ayin Bishut Shevet Halevi. This is, I think Rav Vosner. Shenisha legabe bul shelo huchtam. Haim ze shayach l'shaleach o l'mekabel. He asked the following question. You find a stamp that has not been postmarked, hasn't been canceled. So does it belong to the sender? Does he get to use it again? Or does the recipient get to use it again? The cost of Sham Vizelu Shona. And he writes as follows: Shamati me'az sha'an shemaise b'chutz la'aretz kareu habul shelo lasot avil lahamalchus medina de malchusa. He says, I heard that pious people, maybe he's referring to the Chafetz Chaim, like Barry said, would tear the stamp because you don't want to betray the government who is so benevolent. Amnam zeh midas chasidus. But that's going above and beyond the letter of the law. Umeikar hadin l'chora d'shayich lahamekabel dahasholeach silek atzmo kvar mizeh ad kan l'shana. He says, but it would seem to me that the letter of the law would dictate that this belongs to the recipient of the letter. He gets a non-canceled stamp, and he looks at it as legal tender. In other words, it's not just a representation that I've paid for services, but rather it's almost like currency. Like if a person puts a dollar bill in an envelope and gives it to me, even though his intention was that it should go for something else, but it ended up not going for that purpose, why can't I use it? It sounds like from the Shevet HaLevi that you are allowed to use the stamp a second time. But his only doubt was, whose right of usage is it? Can the sender or the recipient claim its use? And he paskin that it belongs to the recipient because the sender basically sort of removed himself from it by sending it to the recipient. He says, so why is there no problem of gezel? Aren't you stealing from the post office by using the uncanceled stamp a second time? As Rav Sharaga wrote, he says, it seems to me that the Shevet HaLevi was only permitting the use in Chutz La'aretz. It seems to me that this is only true with Gentiles, that a Jew is allowed to exempt himself from a debt by simply failing to pay the debt, as long as there's no Chilul Hashem involved. And therefore, basically, you have this item, normally you would have to pay for it, but since you already have a commodity that has value, if you can shirk the responsibility to pay for it, you're permitted to do so. And that's the way Rav Bloy says. Ela dehiksha al dvarav de'einza begeder havkas halva. Also, kevin derotza case lishtamish bebul shuv v'vahavi gezel bekum v'asei vehisik deberetz Yisrael yesh lesar medina v'sim ditzarachiyah. Rav Bloy was still bothered by this psak because it's not a passive shirking of paying a debt. It's actively utilizing a stamp that is you normally have to pay for, and you're actually stealing actively. Amma medivra hashevet halevi shamnira da'ari afilu be'eretz Yisrael kevin da'harav hashoel hayame eretz Yisrael v'hashevet halevi haralo leheter. But it seems if you look more carefully in that shaila, it's not just talking about chutz la'aretz. It seems that the Shevet HaLevi lived in Eretz Yisrael. The person asking him the shaila was living in Eretz Yisrael. So that doesn't seem to be the right approach to explain it that way. Va'ayin b'shut vayomer Yehuda shekasav lahater lihishtamishuv bebul kivin shahan holas adoar yodiim merosh sheyukama bulim shel yechatmu v'hem mityashim mizeh v'imkein hamakabel zacha min ha'efker ayin sham. The Sefer Vayomer Yehuda, which is also a contemporary Sefer, he writes that you are allowed to use the stamp a second time. Why? Because the post office knows that a certain small percentage of stamps will inadvertently be unpostmarked. They'll be missed. And basically the post office sort of gives up on that. They say, that's part of our cost of doing business. Yeah. And therefore, we let people use the stamp a second time. They make the stamp hefker. And it could be that that's the opinion of the Shevet HaLevi. Amnam Rabbeinu Hagon HaMachaber Shlita Amar Deyesh Lahachmir B'Davar Delo Yehi Ela Safek the Safek Deoraisa L'Chumra. But Rav Sharaga feels you have to be machmir because it's a Safek Gezel. Isser Gezel is an Isser Deoraisa, and therefore a person should be machmir. So I'll tell you, I mean, I feel that, first of all, fine. I think it's appropriate to tear up the stamp, not use it. First of all, it's an extra, what is it, $1 now? What does it cost? What is a stamp now?
85 cents or something like that.
85 cents. Okay. Is it worth 85 cents to enter into a suffix of Gezel, where some posts can say that it's mamish Gezel from the government and others say that it's not? I don't think it's worth it. So I would tell you from that standpoint, it's just a stamp. A stamp is just a stamp. But
so it's just a stamp, then it is a big deal.
Yeah, but you may have put a stain on your neshama that's priceless, right? Why is it's not worth 85 cents? Like, in other words, if you're gonna steal, you know, steal, make sure it's worth it. Make sure it's worth it, you know. But if it's just 85 cents, what's the point? The only thing I was going to say is that it would seem to me that the issue is, do you view the stamp as like a receipt for services rendered, or do you view it as a form of currency? And that to me is the question, and the Makor Baruch doesn't write that, but that's what it would seem to me. If you view a stamp as a form of government currency, just like a dollar bill, so then it can't lose its value unless it is postmarked, in which case the government itself has canceled its value. But if the government hasn't canceled its value, then it retains its original value as representation of the currency of the government, which allows its use to be able to pay for the delivery of postage. Shmuel, go ahead. You get the last minute.
Okay. What happens if someone didn't know how much stamps to put on? They put 2 stamps on instead of 1. And both of them are uncanceled. I can understand maybe ripping up 1, but could you use the second stamp?
Well, it would seem clear that if a person put excess postage and the excess amount was unstamped, you should be allowed to use it, because there's no gezel, because a person paid more for the cost of the services, right? The question would be on the original stamp where the neither one was postmarked. So then you have Rav Sharaga's issue that it constitutes gezel. All right, we'll have to hold it here for today, and we'll go in for Salichos. Have a great day, everybody.